This is Paul Jenkins, and you're listening to the Reluctant Leader Podcast. Now, I believe two things are true. One, everyone leads someone. And two, no one really feels qualified to lead anyone. So maybe you feel overlooked, unqualified, invisible. But the good news is, in the Bible and in life, the most qualified aren't always the most obvious. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Reluctant Leader Podcast. I'm always so excited for you to hear the conversations that I have with some amazing leaders who have overcome some pretty tremendous obstacles. And today's interview is with Tiffany Johnson. You're going to be so encouraged by the way that she has overcome some pretty tough things in her life and how God is using her right now as a result of that. But before we jump into the interview, let me just share with you a review that we got on Apple Podcast from Melanie's Man. He said this: Paul is a seasoned leader who always offers a fresh perspective on all things life. I'm so glad he found a way to overcome his own reluctance to share with the masses his insight, wisdom, and perspective. Thank you so much for those kind words. And I will say this: the masses is a number that grows each time you as a listener like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share these episodes. And I know that today's episode is one that you will want to share over and over again. Like I say, Tiffany has seen some tremendous obstacles in her life and has overcome them well. And I want us to jump right into this conversation with her. I know that you're going to be encouraged. We're so thrilled for this episode to welcome Tiffany Johnson. Tiffany, thanks again for saying yes to this. I got to know you a couple years back. You came and spoke at our church. And so when I was trying to figure out, how do I introduce Tiffany Johnson? I'm, of course, stalking you on Facebook, kind of look at your stuff. And I noticed that in the About section, you have Shark Attack Survivor. And I thought, this is the first interview I'm ever going to do, probably the only interview I'll ever do with somebody who has those words to describe who you are. So I know that you're an author, you help lead worship, you do lots of things. We'll talk about the ministry that you lead, but why don't you just take a minute for people that may not know your story and give us some context to Shark Attack Survivor.
Yeah, it is an interesting little title that I carry now, but one that I don't hold lightly. It has brought tremendous blessing, which is insane to say. But the Lord, he works all things together for his good. And it's not that he works it all out. Sometimes it doesn't work out the way we want it to, but he works it together. And that's what I've seen in this story. Well, tomorrow, actually, so June 2nd, will be 5 years from the date of the attack. We were just on a cruise, enjoying time with just my husband and I without the kids. And the last stop of that cruise was Nassau, Bahamas. And we got out to snorkel. No hesitation, because we've snorkeled for years. So it was just easy decision for us. We jump in, snorkeling for about 20 minutes together. My husband was feeling sick to his stomach because that choppy boat ride out really messed with him. And so he ended up going back to the boat, and I stayed out on the reef because it had only been 20 minutes, and I really wanted more time out there. So I just began to get lost in that world, watching the fish interact and the colors and, absorbing everything. And in the midst of that, I felt like I had just bumped into something. Like, that's the thought that went through my head was, oh, what did I bump into? So I was so nonchalant, I turned to my right to see what I had bumped into, and I was face to face with a shark, and he had my whole arm pinned in his mouth. I have a scar. I know y'all can't see this, but it's about, I don't know, maybe 6 inches from the top of my shoulder. And that's where he first latched on. And so, of course, we were literally face to face, and fear just takes over. I start having visions of my kids playing with my husband in the backyard, like almost like movie clips of my life began to play. And I remember that feeling that my body was giving up. And I was going through that process when I felt the strength of the Lord rise up within me. And I remember pushing those thoughts back of, my kids playing and all these movie clip reels, and I remember thinking, no, you
Mm.
will not take my life. I am not going to die here. And at that moment, I kind of yank my arm, and that's when all the wrestling, the thrashing, and I'm screaming through my snorkel tube, and there's water spraying everywhere, and we're splashing and trying to get, struggling to get away from him. I'm yanking, and this goes on for a extended amount of time. I can't tell you how long. It felt like an eternity, but I'm sure it was,
Sure.
a matter of less than a minute, but, I'm yanking and screaming. And at one point while I yanked, his jaws open and my arm kind of just comes flying out, and I look and it's completely gone, just severed. It was a mangled stump at that point. And I remember just being in shock, like, my arm's gone, like
Right.
I didn't know quite what to think or do, but the Lord gave me that strength to keep moving. And I was already at the surface of the water. So I just had to throw off my snorkel mask, and I screamed out, help me, Jesus. And I began to make my way back to the boat with my non-dominant hand, which is my left arm. I'm taking strokes with my left arm, and I get my right arm out of the water. And in the minute I put it out of the water, it starts spraying blood like an Old Faithful, like
Hmm.
everywhere. And that was the sign for the people on the boat, what was going on.
Sure.
And so my husband, that's what he saw, was me swimming back as he was coming up the ladder. He's washed himself off because he had gotten sick. And that's the sight he sees, is me
Mm.
swimming back with my arms severed, spraying blood everywhere. And I'm trying to get to the boat as quick as possible. All I could think about was that shark's right behind me, gonna grab my leg, grab my arm, grab my side. It felt as if fear was following me, but all I could think about was, Lord, get me to that boat. Like, I was just praying, get me to that boat, get me to that boat, and I'm
Right.
swimming, and in the midst of that, my husband meets me in the water. I probably made it most of the way. The last 10 feet or so is when he finally met me in the water. He kind of just guided me that last 10 feet. And he said the first thing he remembers as he's getting close is hearing me pray. And he
Wow.
said that just marked him. Like, he's like, that's what came out of you
Mm.
in the midst of you fighting for your life, like trying to outswim a shark. At that point, you were praying. So we always talk about, like, what you put in comes out, and
Yep.
so
Yeah.
that literally was what was inside of me. I had no other thoughts, but just, Lord, I need you, and we get into the boat finally, and I felt the peace of the Lord surround me like a cloud
Mm.
of his presence. I can't quite describe it other than I could feel him surrounding me. And I looked at my husband and I was like, okay, get me something to stop the bleeding. Like, I was so focused. I wasn't all crazy panicked, and, like, I knew what had to be done. And we find out there's no med kit on board. So he grabs the beach towel that the cruise line gives us. And we use that to tourniquet my arm, which, if anybody on here knows, like, beach towels are not tourniquets, they're made to soak up blood. But that's what we had. So we were using it to tourniquet my arm per se. And he gets it, to a point where he's tied it real tight. And I'm like, okay, you've got to do it as tight as you possibly can. Like, you're not going to hurt me. We've got to get this thing as tight as you can. And I remember him shaking, trying to keep it tight on my arm. And I had him elevate my arm, and I laid my head on his lap, and I just closed my eyes and I prayed the whole boat ride back. We had to make a stop at Paradise Island. We thought we could go there for a hospital, but we learned they don't have a hospital there. So we had to back the boat up and go an additional 25 minutes. So all in all, I'm on the boat for 35 minutes ish until we get to the main port. And I'm alive still, which is insane.
Yeah.
If that's a small slice in your wrist, and you're going to be dead in a couple of minutes. And I had a 30-some minute boat ride with just a towel to
Right.
keep me alive, and Jesus.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so I'm here today because the Lord sustained me. We find out after surgery that I didn't require a blood transfusion. They said I didn't lose enough blood. So the miracle of me even being alive, let alone not even requiring a blood transfusion, is beyond anything I've ever experienced or been around. And it has rocked me, the power of the Lord. Like, I don't think I'll ever put God in a box after what I've gone through
Yeah.
and live to tell about, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I keep thinking while you're talking, like, I shouldn't be talking to you. I mean, I'm hoping that the gravity of that settles in on the listeners. Like, I mean, there's so many other things that you could still be here and things could have gone wrong, but you should not have even made it to shore.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
to be then at the hospital, I still can't, I'm trying to imagine stopping at the island and having to back up and keep, I mean, it's just
Yes.
like crazy. But then to be at the hospital and have them tell you after all that, you didn't lose enough blood,
Yeah.
just the hand of God. And what really stood out to me while you're talking was that just for your husband to say, boy, in the middle of the worst circumstance, prayer is what's coming out. I mean,
Yeah.
if we don't get anything else out of this interview, man, I hope people get that, because our country right now, we're being squeezed. And I mean, I don't think I'm stretching to say good stuff's not coming out.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
Jesus said, the good things that are stored in you, that's what comes out. And
Absolutely.
just to hear you talk about that, in the worst circumstance is when hopefully the best comes out of believers. We're
Yeah.
following Jesus who's overcome. And just to hear you say that is really encouraging,
It is. And honestly, if you would have told me 10 years ago, you know, in 5 years, this is what's going to happen, you know, you're going to go through this and this is how you'll respond, I would have been like, there's no way. You know, I'm not, I'm not strong enough. I'm not whatever, you know, all the things you think you're lacking.
Right.
But that's what's so amazing with the Lord is that he wants us to be weak so he can be strong in us. Like that's where our dependency needs to be at, is to depend on him 100%.
Yeah.
And when you're in those types of situations where you have no plan B, you know, that's when the Lord can do the biggest work. And we've seen that time and time again in the midst of the shark attack, but then in the aftermath of it all, you know, trying to figure out life now as an amputee, as a mama three, as, you know, figuring this all out. I've no plan B, you know, but the Lord, he's so good. And if we can get our roots down deep into the soil of who he is, man, he makes up the difference.
Yeah, he does. And I think that's so important, because the culture says, hey, Tiffany, you're an overcomer because
Right.
you've got it in you to overcome. And the message that you keep saying over and over again is, I'm an overcomer because he is an overcomer and my roots are in his
Absolutely.
soil. And
Yes.
that's the message that we all love, but we don't necessarily like the avenue to get there, right? Like, we
Right.
have to
Right.
almost be in positions of weakness, like Paul said, so that his strength is made perfect through us. And that
Yeah.
just comes through loud and clear in your story. I had you come speak at our church. I don't know, 2 years ago. Again, it's
Yeah.
hard to keep track of time with a pandemic, but
I know.
but I remember you standing on the platform, and it really resonated with me because, I had a brother had special needs, and not trying to take a detour and make, jabs at Christians, but we've had so many Christians over his lifetime that would stop us, pray for his healing, almost be disappointed, mad at us because he didn't get healed. You just see a lot of stuff. And I remember you saying something to the effect that, people will say to you, don't you think God can give you another arm? And
Mhm.
and if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I remember was you saying, of course I believe that God can grow a new arm, but while I'm waiting, I'm going to learn how to be the best I can with whatever arm can be given to me by doctors and medical professionals. And I just
Yes.
thought that's such a perfect picture of how we trust in God and do the best we can with what we have and still have our souls anchored in his goodness.
Yeah,
You just,
absolutely. And it's a process, right?
it
Like
is.
we've got to trust him in the small things and the big things, and know that even if it doesn't work out exactly the way we want it to, doesn't mean that God's not in it and
Right.
that he's not working. You know, just because we might not see it, he's always working. And I think that's been so evident in our story and everything that we've been through in these last 5 years. It's like we can see the thread now even more so than we did, you know, a month out. Like we can see
Right.
it more as time goes on. We can start to see the Lord working through everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's where trusting in him, no matter what circumstance, is so, so important, because our God is not bound by circumstance. He's a
Right.
God above the circumstance.
Right. Yeah. It's like, and the good news, it's not good news if there's not bad news. I mean,
Right.
it's
Yes,
like the darkness
exactly.
is what makes the light shine so bright.
Yeah.
That's what keeps coming through in your story. And so when I think of courage and bravery, and just you've done a lot in the last 5 years that, I mean, I'm an outsider looking in on your story using those words. And I keep thinking, if I'm in your shoes and I'm hearing those words, I'm like, I'm not brave. I'm not courageous.
Yes.
I'm a normal person,
Yeah.
but God is doing big things through you. And I know that you just recently came back from a trip. I'm going to let you
Yeah.
talk about that. You did do something that, as somebody who does not have Shark Attack Survivor on his Facebook profile, I just think it's a huge testimony to the story that God is writing in your life. And you would just tell us a little bit about what you just did?
Yeah. Yeah. So we just about 3 weeks ago got back from Mexico. We had just enjoyed time again, just my husband and I. This is once a year we do this. So this was our trip for this year. And we had scheduled a catamaran to go out to it's called Isla Mujeres. It's an island kind of off the shore of Cancun. And on the way, the catamaran was going to stop and do snorkeling. And, my husband had looked at me when we booked it and he's like, do you think you're going to do that? I'm like, well, regardless if I do or not, we're still going to do this because it's cheaper to do it this way. It's a better experience, get to see the sunset, all these things. So
Right.
I really wasn't worried about the snorkeling. I'm like, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. So we get out there and I had bought these full face snorkel masks off Amazon last year when we got back from a trip. I'm like, you know what? If I ever do it again, I'm going to use these. Because I had realized on the trip last year, we went to Aruba and I went snorkeling, but it wasn't in the open water. And I had noticed that the goggles, when you put them on, it takes out your peripheral vision. You cannot see a thing but just straight ahead of you.
Mhm.
And it hit me while I was snorkeling then that like, no wonder why I never saw it coming, because he came from my right side and I couldn't see anything. It's like putting blinders on.
Right.
That's a whole nother message in itself.
Yeah, it is.
So when I got back from Aruba last year, I'm like, I'm going to buy these full face. I had seen people with them, I'm like, I'm going to buy this thing because if I ever decide to actually go out in the open water again, I'm going to have that. So we had it with us, these full face snorkel masks, and they stop, and it's open water. I mean, I wasn't sure what they were going to do. So we were kind of just waiting to see, and they lay the anchor down and they're like, okay, we're going to have everybody get out that wants to snorkel. You're going to stay on this rope. And then you got to make a decision. Like, are you going to snorkel or are you not going to? Because whoever's going to stay, the boat's actually going to leave and it's going to go all the way to this other side. And he pointed to like where it was, and you're going to snorkel across to the boat. And I was like, wait, what? That was not at all any type of experience I've ever had snorkeling. And we've snorkeled a ton. And I'm like, you mean the boat's not going to stay here? And we can't, usually you can just snorkel a little bit and come in whenever you want to.
Right.
I'm like, when you are in, you're committed. So I was like, oh gosh, I did not know if I was ready for that. So I'm like, I'm going to at least get in the water. I get in the water and it's like choppy. The water, it's waves are splashing. It's crazy. And I put on the snorkel mask and I just put my head under the water, and all the chaos above me, I put my face in the water and it was like instant quiet.
Mm.
And I see the fish interacting and I'm like, okay, like I like that. This is okay. I feel God's peace in this. Like, I think I can do this again. Like it was like all the chaos just stopped, And so my husband's like, are you good? He like gave me a thumbs up. I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And he's like, okay, well, I guess let's do this. So they leave and we start snorkeling, and I'm in the middle of the pack. Like my husband made me stay in the middle. We had a big group with us. My husband was behind me the whole time. And of course, the first few like swimming feet, I was like a little like, nervous. I'm looking back and forth, panning more than I probably would. But as I got more into the reef and seeing the fish interact, it was like all those worries just kind of left me and I got to enjoy it again. And I didn't know, like I knew I'd probably snorkel again. I didn't know if I would enjoy it again because there's a difference,
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just being so thankful that I had enough peace, that, that God gave me the strength to even get in it and do it, but then to enjoy it, I was like, thank you, Lord, for that blessing.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. I was almost expecting just to get a notch in my belt and walk out and be like, okay, I did it, and not really enjoy it, but I did it,
Yeah.
but I actually got to enjoy it. And so we got on the other side, we get out, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just did it. I snorkeled in open water again, and we look at the date, and it's exactly 2 weeks from my 5-year anniversary. So 2 weeks shy. So I'm like, wow, that's just, it ended up being a monumental moment accidentally,
Right.
which is so awesome. So I got back in the water, I snorkeled in the open water, and I enjoyed it. So I give God all the glory and for all the strength and the peace that he surrounded me with to even be able to do
Yeah. And as somebody who has snorkeled all of one time in my life,
it.
I relate to the statement, doing it and enjoying it, two totally different things, because I think
Right.
I drank so much salt water when I was doing
Yeah.
it, and you're supposed to blow out and I'm breathing in, and it was not a peaceful experience. And I wasn't even near sharks, So,
Right.
but congratulations. That's so inspiring. Just, I kept
Yeah.
thinking about, and I wish I knew where the scripture was. Somebody will Google it and let us know. But the Bible talks about God making you prosperous in the land of your affliction. And
Yes.
didn't he just do that in your life? You're in the
Yes. Amen.
spot, the open water, and you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
And there's such a message there for people.
Yes.
We I'd love to know just kind of some of the people that you've been able to touch. I've got to think that you're in a pretty small club of shark
Yes.
attack survivors.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that has opened up so many possibilities for you to share with people. And just your ministry is called Be an Overcomer. Obviously, you're just living that out, right? You
Yeah.
exude that. Even as we're talking, I kept thinking, like, people won't see your face, but you radiate just the hope of Jesus, and it's so encouraging. So, what would you share with somebody who feels? I mean, I don't use the word attack lightly, because I know attacks are attacks, whether they're from an animal or they're from the enemy or they're from
Yeah.
wherever. There are people right now that feel attacked, and sometimes we just want to give up. We don't
Yeah.
want to keep going. I mean, what would you share with those people that you have learned, and how you've overcome in your life, and how Jesus can help them overcome as well?
I think the biggest thing that I always grab onto, and I still do, to this day, almost 5 years in now, is that God is good regardless.
Yeah,
And I've kind of alluded to that earlier in our conversation, but sometimes we don't get to choose the circumstance, right? Like life just happens. And in sometimes we feel like, well, if this happened, then where is God in this? Like you start cursing that thing, whatever it is, the attack or whatever, instead of looking at it from a perspective of, okay, God, how can you use this? And that's the perspective shift that I had to have early on, and that I still remind myself in, is that regardless of what it looks like on the outside, Satan can be attacking, or it could just be general just life. It doesn't
right.
always have to. Sometimes I think we give Satan too much credit, like, like, oh man, something's broken, dang it, Satan, what are you doing, like. So I don't think it's always an attack necessarily, but there are that is real as well, the attacks from Satan. But in either case, we don't always choose the circumstance, but what we do get to choose is our response in the circumstance.
Yeah,
And that's the piece that we have control of. And I think if we can get a hold of that, to understand that when everything feels chaotic, when everything feels like the walls are closing in, when it feels like there is no joy, there is no peace, there is no strength, that's when we can actually choose the joy that God has for us. That's when we can choose to lay in his strength, to choose hope, because we have hope in Jesus. It's those pieces of him that we can grab onto in the midst of the chaos. And that's what I had to do at the beginning, a lot. And I still do now every day. I look at my arm, I wake up, and it's like a constant reminder that I am lacking. that I'm never going to fully be where I was before. But that doesn't mean that God's no less good. In fact, he's proven himself even bigger in my life than I ever would have ever seen before. So, but it's me allowing him to use those desperate, hard times to mold and shape me rather than cursing the thing, that attack,
Yeah.
and he can use the attack. I think is the message here is it sometimes. Does he allow things to happen? Yes. Does he send it? No, that's not the God we serve. Like, he's a good, loving God, but does he allow it? Or do we live in a sinful world? Yeah. I mean, so we're going to find all kinds of darkness and stuff because we're not on the other side yet. But God can use everything. Nothing is wasted in him, and allowing him to use it and clinging to the joy when we need it, clinging to his peace when we feel stress and anxiousness, clinging to his strength when we feel weak, clinging to his hope when we're in these hopeless situations. That's the gift that he's given us, is the choice to grab those things, because that's what he has for us.
Yeah. And you're such a strong voice in that. You're such an encouraging voice in and that's one reason why I think God has elevated you on the platform that you have. And that's what we want to do. I just want more people to know your name, not so that you get glory, but so that he gets glory and they get
Absolutely.
comfort. Also
Yeah.
that we comfort people with the comfort that we ourselves were comforted with. I read this. It's ironic. I read it this morning, just a God thing, but I read about a study. It's a weird study where they actually tried to see how long people could stand barefoot in ice cold water, right? But
Mm-hmm.
what they found was if you stood in that water alone, you could last a certain amount of time. But if somebody stood next to that bucket encouraging you, you can do it, you can do it, you actually stood twice as long. Just
Wow.
from somebody being near you, encouraging you. And I feel like that's what you're doing right now is, you're like, you have, you don't have street cred, you have shark cred.
Right.
Like,
That's a thing.
you're like, if that's a thing, you're like, you can get through this because I know what God's brought me through. And so when
Yeah.
you speak with a very authentic, credible voice. And I just want to say thank you for
Yeah.
using your voice, using your experience, not shying away, not hiding, not pulling the blinds and saying, well, I'm just a victim now for the rest of my life, but
Yeah.
stepping into that place of pain. And I do know that you're transparent about that. Like, I feel the
Yes.
pain.
Yes.
But
Absolutely.
yeah, we're not just saying God's good and I never hurt. Like, no,
Right.
there's struggle here, but
Yes.
he's faithful in the struggle.
Absolutely. And we overcome by the blood of the lamb and the word of our testimony, right?
Yeah,
That's what it says in
that's right.
Revelation. So I think the other piece is being able to share it with others and see that what I've gone through is helping others. Oh my gosh, there's nothing like it. It's like it makes everything, all the pain, all the stress, the frustration, the anxiousness, the physical pain, all of it worth it when I see lives literally being changed because I'm willing to share what God's done and the hard stuff, so let that be an encouragement to y'all too. Like, don't be afraid to share your story, because what you just said is, when we're together encouraging each other, and one way we can do that is saying, you're not alone. I've gone through something like this too. And some people shy away from their past and they want to hide it, but that's what Satan wants. He wants us to hide our past. No, God wants to use our past. And one way we can do that is sharing our story with others. So
Yeah.
let that be an encouragement for you too.
Yeah, that's so good. We named this the Reluctant Leader podcast because I tell people all the time, I'm the reluctant leader. Like, I
Yeah,
had
right.
for so long felt like, you don't need to use me, God. Like, there's so many other people that are more qualified. But God just saying to his bride, share your story. Just
Yeah.
tell people what I've done. And just that simple step of obedience opens the door.
Oh,
And
it does. And it always brings blessing.
yeah, and you're living that out. And I want to say thank you again for just taking time to chat with us and talk to our listeners. I know that people are going to want to be in touch with you and follow you. So can you just take a few minutes and maybe let people know how they can find you on social media or stay in touch with what you're doing through your ministry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do run a ministry called Be an Overcomer Ministries. You can find that at beanovercomerministries.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. My handle is at Be an Overcomer, but it's just the letter B, not BE, because that was already taken. So I had to be creative. So you can find me there, and I'm sure you'll post links to
Yeah,
some of those
that's
things.
for all the non-spellers. They're like, how do you
Yeah.
spell B? Right.
Exactly. But yeah, I do send out a monthly email newsletter that kind of has some encouragement in it. You usually share a video of some sort of encouragement, but also what's going on, speaking events that are coming up. I speak at local churches and different events. Um, and so if you want to be in the know or just follow the ministry, that's another good way. You can sign up through my website. So I would love for y'all to join me in this journey.
Yeah, and we'll definitely link all that in the show notes for sure. Just so people don't go to BE and Overcomer. Like,
Yes.
don't do that. That's not the right one. Just
Right.
just be. So yeah, we'll definitely link that so people can find you. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to share. And congratulations on, is that the right word? Congratulations on 5 years and snorkeling again and open water and all the things
Yes.
that
Oh,
God is doing.
it's
He
so
has
good.
truly taken your tragedy and he is turning it into triumph. So that's,
Yes.
we say those kind of little phrases all the time. Isn't it crazy? We say them and then people go, they roll their eyes like, huh, it's just a bumper sticker until it's
Yeah.
your life.
Right.
It's like, no time out. Might be a bumper
No,
sticker
this
for
is for
you,
real.
but like it's really happening in my life. And just thanks for letting
Yes.
us in on that story and for encouraging us. So
It's my honor. Thank you
yeah.
for the opportunity.
You've been listening to the Reluctant Leader Podcast. Thanks so much for being a part of this conversation. You can follow us at the reluctantleaderpodcast.com or wherever you download your podcast. Be sure that you subscribe and like us and leave us a rating and a comment. We'd love to hear from you and hear what God's showing you. And remember this, no matter how reluctant you feel, keep saying yes, and He'll do the rest.